other song.
Mike's Daily Podcast.
So much for that name for the show, Mike's Daily Podcast, because I haven't done this show daily. It's a weekly thing. Now I would like to do it daily again, but I don't know how because my life has been so busy. I'm an operations manager for a radio station conglomerate, and to get it all done makes me really dread it. To get it all done, it takes a lot of work.
Mike's Daily Podcast.
A lot of work. I'm not saying my job's not fun. It has its fun times. I work with fun people.
Mike's
But when you have
Daily
technology
Podcast
get in your way and cause issues, then I'm frustrated. Well, let me tell you something. Knowing is half the battle. Yes, that wonderful little nugget cliche. It's true, though, because by this week, I learned a lot. I just basically said, I'm going to hunker down, because that word hunker down is used all the time. I'm going to hunker down, and I'm going to try and figure out this software, this machinery, as best I can, so that I don't have to rely on people. I can rely on my brain and use workarounds. And meanwhile, check this out, I am teaching other people around me so that they know, because knowledge is power. Knowing is half the battle. Knowledge is power. See where this is all going? See what truth often happens when it's repeated a lot. Now, some people use this. I'm sorry, all you Trump lovers out there. He used it. He would repeat a lie enough times that he won the election. He'd repeat it enough times so that you believed it. And you may want to believe it. You may believe it. Fine. When it leads to things like a bunch of people attacking the Capitol, that gets a little crazy. That gets a little That's not America. That's not the America you and I want to live in. So I'm just saying that.
And here's today's podcast picture.
There are truthisms in this life. Let's just say if they're repeated by one man, don't necessarily believe it. But if you see it around you, surrounding you constantly every day, I mean, your lungs suck in air and then you're able to live. You pretty much realize that you need air to live, and you need the Hollies to sing you a song. Basil. All I need is the air that I breathe and my Basil. The late, great Basil the boxer, who would sometimes sing with me. And now, a quick message for you. And it's just been a busy week of learning, a busy week of working with great people who have helped me out tremendously, and a lot of gotchas. I like to call it whack-a-mole, but somebody else I work with says they're gotchas. And there were all these little gotchas happening in my system, in my techno system, that were popping up and causing issues, big issues, money, expensive money costing, just torpedo the budget type issues. And so I'm trying to get ahead of those, trying to smack those all down. Bad issues, bad problems, bad gotchas, and getting it all working out. Hey, last podcast, somebody gave me a nice little compliment, a nice little text. And they enjoyed the last podcast. And so that's another thing. When I get a compliment for a podcast, it messes with my mind, because I know I got to try and be as good as the previous podcast, and I can't always deal with that type of pressure. But I at any rate, here's this podcast today. And let me tell you, I blamed Mike Lindell a lot this week. We had a commercial for My Pillow that would not run. And I'm like, Mike, it's Mike Lindell. He uses every conspiracy theory under the sun, moon. I'm going to use conspiracy theories against him. It's some kind of, he's the reason. But I had a text from someone that said, Mike, I'm 1/3 of the way in your latest podcast episode, and I've never laughed harder and felt so close to this. You're a marvel, LOL. That was the inspiration for me to get into this podcast today. But so I'm in Podcastro Valley 10 today at the last place on earth, Cafe Anyway. I usually do my podcast from my lair. Well, from Cafe anyway, but in my lair in the Podcastro Valley Cafe anyway. And I really, it's been difficult lately because I have been working from home, and all the stress surrounding work is now in my home, is now in my lair, is now in my office. And when I walk into that room, I'm immediately feeling all the psychological connections to everything that I've been dealing with and all the stress. And you know how stressed out I was last podcast, to quote the late, great 21 Pilots. Oh, no, wait, they're still alive. Their music isn't as good as that one album. But you know what? That's fine. They're still putting out stuff, very, very autobiographical stuff. So kudos to them. And you know what? My point is that when you walk into that office and you're feeling the stress and you're thinking about work, it's hard to do a fun show like this. This is basically a hobby. I don't make any money off of this. I spend money on this. I paid for a website. I don't pay for a webmaster, although the company I use for the website will answer questions if I have them. So, and I have ways that you can help support this podcast, which you can find at MikesDailyPodcast.com, but nobody ever does it. Nobody ever helps out. And that's fine. I'm not putting any pressure on you to do that. I'm going to keep doing this regardless, and I have been doing this regardless. But when it is something of a hobby that you don't make any money at, and it's just a passion, and you're being so bogged down and burdened with work, how on earth do you get to those hobbies, those necessary things you need to do in life? Now, I found an article on the website themuse.com, and they talk about how to find and make time for your passion even when you're busy. And here's one thing they mention is think on it. Reflect on the 3 things that have been part of your essence, your being, your truth since you were a kid. Is it playing the flute, painting in oils, baking macaroons for your family? Maybe you're social and inactive and have always enjoyed playing on a soccer team. Oh, that would be active, not inactive, because soccer is a very active game. If you no longer partake in the activities or hobbies you've enjoyed since childhood, why have you stopped? As we go outside a cafe anyway, where we bring you Mike's Daily Podcast, somewhere in Podcastro Valley, and it's getting warmer, folks. Drink lots of water. Take that little spray bottle, put water in it, stick it in your fridge, spritz yourself. It'll cool you down. It's very nice. And I don't have air conditioning, so that's my way of getting around it. Perhaps there are variations of these activities or hobbies that may better apply to you now that you're a working adult. For example, if you've enjoyed acting in plays in high school, maybe joining an improv class would be a way to fuel that passion now. Here's a little tip, though. Do not join an improv class that basically asks you to shell out a bunch of money to join it. Yeah, you can be part of the class, but it costs like $50 a session. No. You should it should be not that expensive to join an improv class, in my opinion, because don't they make money performing? Shouldn't they make the money off of that instead of off of you? Because in the end, you're the talent that's going to draw the audience to watch it, is what I'm thinking. And you're putting the time and effort into it. But Mike, it's a class. You have to pay for classes. What about the teachers? They need to be paid. Yeah, but you see where I'm coming from too. They're making money off of you. Just like Apple and Google Podcasts and Odyssey, iHeart Podcasts, or whatever they're calling it now, and all the other places that you can find Mike's Daily Podcast, Podomatic, Spreaker. Heck, I'm looking at my website right now because that's all it says. Mixcloud, Anchor, Dropbox. Well, they don't really. Podcast Addict, Launchpad, Spotify. They're all making money off of me. I mean, I don't think there's a lot of people listening to this podcast, but YouTube as well. If potentially a lot of people tune in, Stitcher, if a lot of people were to listen to this podcast, they would make a lot of money off of me. So in a way, they don't care. But you see what I'm saying, where I'm going, or maybe not. If your passion was being on the dance team in college, how about teaching a dance class to troubled youth? That's a great idea. Put some thought into it and experiment with different activities or hobbies. You may be surprised to discover what makes you tick. You may be discovered to hear the following sentence. You ready? Here we go. Mike's Daily Podcast is officially a decade old. 10 years old. Yes. It's true. You what? Did you just hear what I said?
Baloney.
It is so true, in fact. I'm going to play this bizarre thing here now. And...
Blow it up. That's how we ball out.
Awesome. Yes, Mike's Daily Podcast, once again, 10 years old. As of yesterday, yes, I started Mike's Daily Podcast on May the 7th. It is now May 8th.
I love it.
You got it, folks. The podcast is 10 years old. Today's episode is 2239, a decade old. 1 decade. Yes. 10 years old. Can you believe that? Now, when I started the podcast, I was married. I said to myself, and this may have to do with what I was just talking about, with finding ways to do your hobby even when you're really busy. And that is, I thought to myself, well, if I want to do a podcast, I would really like to do one daily. Because every day there are things I can find to talk about that are interesting, things happening in my life, things I'm seeing in everyone's lives, in the world's life. And I'm just going to throw it out there. It's pretty general, isn't it? Very general. And I said, I'm going to be General Mike. And what ended up happening was I'd say about 3 or 4 years after I started the podcast. Let's see, actually 2 years after I started the podcast. Yeah, I got divorced. So much for that. Probably right as I started the podcast. So 10 years back, I was putting a lot of musicians on the podcast. I found that, and this was 10 years ago, 2011. We were just starting this whole thing where musicians... Hey, there's podcasts that play music. I could get my music out there on a podcast. And at that point, all the restrictions for playing a song, they weren't enacted yet. YouTube wasn't being as vigilant yet to catch people that were playing music. Which, by the way, I spoke with Sebastian Gorka, who's been kicked off of YouTube, mainly because he still says a lot of that conspiratorial election stuff that... YouTube, rightly so. They don't want to be part of that. They don't want to spread misinformation. And that's one of the big misinformation things out there, whether you believe it or not. But they first knocked him off of YouTube because he kept playing Radioactive on YouTube. That was his music for the beginning of his show. I don't think it is anymore. I think he does kind of a patriotic thing. But yeah, that's Imagine Dragons song. So YouTube says, hey, if you're going to put music on your podcast, you have to pay the artist for it. I don't know. You have to work it out some kind of way. They got it going. So I eventually told musicians, no more. I can't do. And I even had Saint Motel on the podcast way back before they got super popular. And they, a great band out of Nova Scotia, Hey Rosetta, they were on. Who else? Oh, Tristan. She's still putting out stuff. She's awesome. and a couple other folks, a lot of local Bay Area people. But when I played their songs on YouTube on my podcast, because I upload the podcast to youtube.com/MikesDailyPodcast, I'd get dinged. The podcast would get taken down. They'd say, a strike against you. Next time we're going to take down your your YouTube account. So I said, that's it. Sorry, guys. Also, here's another interesting thing about musicians. And I'm sorry, musicians, but you know this is true. You guys do not show up on time. Oh, my gosh. There was one guy I was trying to... I go, hey, we're going to do the interview tomorrow at 2. Okay. And then tomorrow at 2 comes by and he never shows. I'm like, what happened? What? Huh? Oh, sleeping. So, to sum it all up, folks, this podcast has been on for 10 years. There you go. And I've outlasted a lot of podcasts out there. Be true to you. Sometimes we do certain things because we think we should do them, because they're trendy, because our friends are doing them, or because we have a degree or specific training in something. Ignore all that noise and instead listen for the voice nudging you in a certain direction rather than focusing on what you think you should be doing. It's okay to do things that are outside your box or other people's boxes. It's okay to try something wacky or weird or offbeat because it piques your interest. Remember, self-actualization doesn't come from people-pleasing. It comes from being you. Which sometimes first requires finding you. And that, my friend, is why I started the dang podcast to begin with. And that is what I have to remember when I sometimes feel like chucking the whole podcast thing. But if you're listening and you have been listening for 10 years, which I highly doubt, but if you have, you put up with the fact that life gets in the way with me sometimes and I can't do it daily. Rediscover recess in your life. Remember being in grade school and having an hour of recess just to run, play, and jump. Why don't we do that anymore? Carve out a little time each day or each week for play. Be it going for a spontaneous hike in the woods, doing a paint by number, or dancing freestyle in your living room. Yes, personal recess time, very important. You need to play. We put too much stress on ourselves. And it's only through playtime that I think we re-energize ourselves again. And we build back up that energy and we get to enjoy the things we're passionate about. A to-do list is really effective for making sure you have time for your passions. I'm not a big fan of to-do lists. I'm going to be honest with you. I do it as a stress reliever move. When a lot of things are building up, I start writing it all down on a piece of paper. I don't do the notes in the phone because to get to the notes is too much of a chore. It's easier to just find that piece of paper on my desk and look at it and go, I got to do this and cross it off. There's something about crossing off something when you've done it. When you cross it off the list, it is such a feeling of that's over with. Move on. I've killed the dragon. Move on. Once you rediscover your passions and realize how critical they are to your self-actualization and ultimate happiness, you may find yourself needing to reprioritize your overall schedule. Working a full-time professional job occupies much of the daytime, so finding a time during the week or weekend, like I am doing now, for this hobby of mine, when you can incorporate your passion or hobby in a manner that is both enjoyable and sustainable, is critical. If you're a morning person and find you're fired up to work your passion before you head to work, that's awesome. Or perhaps you like to burn the midnight oil, in which case evenings may be a good time to pursue your passion. Listen, I did for 16 years. I discovered this last night. I was on a walk, which you should always do something like that after a stressful day. Take a walk, take a breather, disengage. And I'm going for a walk around my neighborhood. It's a nice evening and the stars are out, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, for 16 years I worked night shifts. The first full-time radio job I had was a night shift. I think it started at 6 in the evening, went till midnight. It was a 6-hour shift. Oh, you don't even want to know how much I made an hour. It was pittance. Pittance. Scary. To what? I mean, this is 1990, but gosh. Oh. So I did the night shift. I'd get off the night shift and I would take a jog down Thousand Oaks Boulevard in the town of Thousand Oaks. And I would jog by what used to be Jungle Land, a very famous place where Jane Mansfield's son was, what is it? Is it mangled? Is that when a lion attacks somebody but doesn't kill them, just gives them a lot of injuries? Maimed. That's it. Maimed Jane Mansfield's son. But this was years before I was jogging by it. I think that happened in the 60s or something. Jane Mansfield's daughter is Mariska Hargitay, for those you didn't know. So I'm jogging in the evening, but Thousand Oaks Boulevard was beautifully lit, and I would jog along with all the street lights. It was nice and safe. Not a car on the road. Quiet. It was beautiful. I would do that every night around midnight. Stayed in shape. Go home. Go to sleep. Do it all again the next day. Then I got a job at a country radio station, K-Hay. 11 years I was doing nights there. Santa Fe Cafe, which was the precursor to Cafe Anyway, and doing this podcast, which, by the way, 10 years ago, that was something on my mind. I'm like, I want to do a daily podcast, and I want to be at a restaurant like I did the Santa Fe Cafe, and I did that daily for 11 years. So let's see if I can do this for 11 years. And I'm almost there. 10 years. That's pretty good. So the Santa Fe Cafe did 11 years doing a 7 to midnight shift live on the radio, taking requests. This is the peak of the Garth Brooks, Shania Twain, Dixie Chicks era. The band Alabama, Tim McGraw. Remember Tim McGraw and R. Kelly? Well, not R. Kelly. Nelly. Is it Nelly? Over and over again? There you go. What happened to Nelly? It's getting hot in here. Take a ride with me. I mean, awesome songs. Early 2000s, early O's. So then the early O's came, by the way, and I got moved to a station called B95.1. I'm wearing a B95.1 shirt right now, which you can see if you go to MikesDailyPodcast.com. I'll have the video posted of me wearing it, my little short clip video for this podcast. And it's also at youtube.com/MikesDailyPodcast.com. Or youtube.com/MikesDailyPodcast. There you go. And that, when I went on B95.1, I was still doing nights for a couple of years. And then the assistant program director left, and he was doing middays. So when I got moved to middays, that was the first time in 16 years that I had a job where I was getting up like most people, getting up at 6, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning and then going to work. And then all the other stuff happened where I became a program director in Alabama for a country station and all of that. Then I was let go in radio, took a couple years off from radio, then got back into it. And so eventually, I was doing nights again on the weekend, working for the radio station that actually you can hear me on tomorrow between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. There's a radio station. There's a link to that website for the radio station at MikesDailyPodcast.com. I'm on every Sunday from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And they just changed formats. They're playing 70s, 80s, and 90s. Primarily 80s. But it's like classic hits. So you can hear that tomorrow. I'll be on live. So I was doing nights on the weekend for that. But then I found this talk radio station in the Bay Area, and they needed a producer, but it required me waking up at 4 in the morning. And I go, okay, let's give this a try. So for the first time in my career in radio, I'm waking up at 4 in the morning. And you have to be a particular type of animal for that. And I've talked a lot about that on this podcast. I used to do this podcast very, very early in the morning, like 5:30 in the morning, and then post it every day. And I think I had the most listeners I ever did because I was really doing it daily. And I was doing it early in the morning. And I think most of the time my brain wasn't even working, so I don't know how good those podcasts were, but a lot of people were listening. But that is hard work, and I did that for about 3.5 years and then became the operations manager I was talking about earlier, and now I wake up a little bit later and it's a little bit better, but it still requires me to get up pretty early because lots of stuff is happening. Always happens. Everything happens early in the morning, doesn't it? Everything. So it's tough to be someone in a managerial position and not get up early in the morning. At any rate, it blew my mind to think back to the fact that I did 16 years of nights. And that means getting off of work at midnight, getting home, and like not going to bed till 2 in the morning, and then you wake up, at 10 o'clock in the morning, or maybe later, if you're lucky. It's tough to do. It happened, 9/11, I got up, like 10 o'clock in the morning. At that point, all the stuff had happened. And in fact, my girlfriend, who I later married and later divorced, she left a message on my answering machine saying, listen, some bad stuff has happened in New York, and just want you to know, whatever happens, I love you, that kind of thing, right? Just words of assurance. And I'm like, what is she talking about? And I turned on the TV, and of course, that's what you immediately saw it that day. My mom had a different story where she didn't turn on the radio or the TV. She went to the beach because she was living in Oxnard, California, and they got lovely beaches there. And it was her day off, so she went to the beach, came back. As she was walking back to the car, I think somebody told her as she was getting into the car what was going on, and she went home, turned on the news, and was like, what? So having the night shift means you miss out on a lot of stuff because everything happens in the morning, doesn't it? It always happens in the morning. Okay. Thank you so much for listening to this part of the show, which was the main part of the show. Now Mike is going to go through a bunch of stuff really fast. And by the way, thank you to that that article that was written by Sarah Wohler from Career Contessa about making time for your passions. The last thought she had was, I believe that if we pay attention to our gut and listen to our truth, we can hear it speaking loud and clear. However, passionate pursuits take time to hone and develop, especially if we've allowed them to sit on the back burner while we've been tending to other more practical things. Don't beat yourself up for this. Instead, focus on pursuing the passion that is truly yours. If you listen for it, it will speak. And if you nurture that passion, it will grow. Working a daily job while discovering and pursuing your passions demands a lot of time and focus, but they are equally fundamental human needs. One for economic stability and the other for self-actualization. For many of us, especially those with a lot of creative drive and entrepreneurial spirit, balancing our career and pursuing our dreams are critical to leading a full, enriched life. All right, folks, I'm going to zip through this real quick. A couple of things I wanted to get to before we wrap up the show. A couple of thoughts I'm just going to throw at you willy-nilly. The all-electric car thing that we think is happening. In the Bay Area, we see a lot of it because of all the Teslas driving around. Elon Musk going to be on Saturday Night Live tonight. We'll see how that goes. But it's interesting because you're going to blow up the grid. If you continue, if we're thinking about all electric cars, in my neighborhood, I know we had a big blackout that happened, and it was probably caused by all the Teslas that started appearing on the street and people plugging it in, and the grid's not ready for it. Just ask Texas. They had all their deregulation and everything, and then the grid blew up. it's going to take a lot of infrastructure to get us ready for all these electric cars. And I can't afford one. I don't know about you. I cannot afford an electric car. So I'm going to be gassed for quite a while. In the Bay Area, we start to think, oh, everybody's going to go electric. Well, there's all these electric charging stations everywhere here. But as soon as you leave the area, as soon as you leave California, forget about it. So, I mean, I want electric cars to succeed, but at the same time, let's just say that there's going to be a lot of building has to be done for that. And then, who's going to pay the taxes? Who's going to pay for all of this when we can't even afford electric cars? It's interesting. Who's going to pay for it? Okay. Maybe you have an idea. You can call me 336MM Daily. 3 + 3 = 6. MM as in Mike Matthews. Daily as in what this podcast hopes to try to be more of as things get a little bit more stable at work. All right. Inflation. The mention of inflation by large company CEOs, people that talk business, overall has gone up 800-fold. So something to think about. Inflation is on the rise, and it's going to be a thing. It's going to be happening more and more in the next year. Through, couple of websites, through YouTube channels, rather. I guess these are also websites, too, but they are fascinating to watch. Through the Lens. Oh, my gosh, I have been so hooked on this lately. It's this kid named Josh, and he is a fantastic photographer. He gets this video footage that's unbelievable, and he goes to all these amazing places. Yosemite. He'll go to the places around the Bay Area, Muir Woods, goes to San Diego, talks about different cities, like things to do in the cities. And it's not necessarily all California. He goes to Louisville. He did the Route 66 drive with his dad. His dad's a lot of fun. His wife, Amy, is funny. She talks, here are some things I really like to go visit. The food is really good, and I'm a vegetarian. And so she's a vegetarian, but her husband, Josh, eats lots of meat products, barbecue. Everything's got cheese on it. He loves donuts. Donuts with bacon. But he's gone all over the place, Josh, and has done amazing footage. And I guess he's very prolific, too. Puts out a lot of material, and even during the pandemic, he's been getting out there. Sedona, Santa Fe. Speaking of Santa Fe, he's gone to Death Valley with his dad, and just Through the Lens. It's amazing. And there's a California Through the Lens website as well. Also, this is fascinating. Have you seen these people that have... Now, you've seen rides. Like, if you can't... I mean, none of us have made it into Disneyland within the past year. It closed as soon as the pandemic happened. In Florida, where they have done this whole thing where it's all about masks, and it's all about social distancing, but they didn't really want to shut down everything. So Disney World opened back up almost immediately right after that, the initial shutdown. But it opened up and has been in service, has been going on over the past year, and lots of people have been filming the rides with HD quality video, and that's amazing to watch. And there's also these people that walk around the amusement parks or places near the amusement park or places of interest where you would like to take a walk, and they video the whole thing. And they don't do any cuts. They just video the whole walk. So you see every boring part of, let's say, Disney Springs, which is the free to the public outdoor mall area. And I enjoyed looking at that this past week because I went there with my mom back when she could still walk. She can still walk, but as you probably remember, I have mentioned this on the podcast quite a few years ago now, and it's amazing to me that it's been quite a few years. And shout out to my mom here on Mother's Day tomorrow. But my mom lost part of her leg about, I think it's been 4 years now, and we can't walk that, well, not, she and I just walked all of Disney Springs. I think it was 2013. It was near Mother's Day, actually, 2013 or 2014. And then a couple of years went by and something happened where she lost a part of her leg. And we can't do that anymore. So together, in lieu of that, it's interesting to walk to somebody videos that so you can sit down and walk it. I don't know if she could care less about Disneyland, but to see that whole area and is videoed for you and you can watch it, that's amazing. So somebody who does that is, I think it's called Windwalker is the name of that channel. And they go all over the place. So maybe there's something you would like to see. It's interesting to have it on. If you have a YouTube connection to your HD flat screen and you have that on, it's like you're actually there. I love it. Disney Food Blog, I also find interesting because even though I never want to visit another Disney park ever again, I love to listen to the lady, what's her name? Pam. I forget who hosts it, but she talks about all the food that they have at Disney and how expensive it is. And she does these really good camera shots of the food. And I go, oh, there, I can see the food and not eat it and not gain the weight. Oh, and I also don't have to pay the crazy prices for that food, as well as the expensive plane ticket and the hotel stay and all that. Finally, there's another great channel on YouTube called Critical Drinker. And it sounds like a drunk Scottish guy. And all he does, his channel, is talk about how Stranger Things went downhill, how bad Wonder Woman 1984 was. Basically, every overhyped superhero science fiction movie, he tears it apart. Oh, what he says about Avatar is fantastic. And the new Doctor Who, which, by the way, you should watch if you haven't yet. The Doctor Who special that came out, I think it was 2013 or 14. That was such a good, I think it was 2 hours, close to 2 hours, Doctor Who special. It mentioned all the stuff that had to do with Doctor Who mythology. It had David Tennant on it, Matt Smith, who have gone on to bigger things since then. And they do this one thing inside the TARDIS. They're in the spaceship, and there's these round circles. And I remember Matt Smith going, oh, it's got the round thingies. What are the round thingies for? David Tennant goes, I never knew what those are all. Ah, great stuff. I'm a nerd. So, hunker down. Watch a good video channel on YouTube. Watch out for inflation. New survey asked if people think Mother's Day is a real special occasion or just one we celebrate because of, quote, pressure from commercial entities. 60% of people think it's real. 30% say it's something that's pushed on us like a Valentine's Day to make money, to cash in on it. If you like cheap beer, but like classy cheap beer, Miller High Life is running a contest to hire a, quote, ambassador of the Champagne of Beers region. They're trying to get the city of Milwaukee to create a region in honor of their beer. Oh, like the Champagne region in France. A survey by Groupon reveals that 40% of mothers have faked a positive reaction to a Mother's Day gift. And Moderna, that's the shot I got. In fact, I get my second shot this Tuesday. They say their coronavirus vaccine has a 96% effective rate in teens just after one shot. Crocs is giving away 50,000 pairs of free clogs next week to nurses. Okay, beer reduces chances of heart disease, says Harvard, because a moderate amount of alcohol may affect your brain to help you relax, reduce stress levels, and perhaps through these mechanisms lower the incidence of cardiovascular disease. There is still a chicken wing shortage. Twitter makes in-app tipping official with a tip jar. Oh, I should get that going on my Twitter page, which is @MikeTalks. And finally, Braising. Oh, braising. This is an issue I'd like to braise, and that is, braising is a simple cooking technique that produces mouth-watering results. Braised meals cook slowly in the oven with little effort, and they're economical, turning inexpensive cuts of meat and affordable root vegetables, if you'd like to keep it vegetarian, which I've been trying to do, but it's not as easy as it would appear, into meltingly delicious dishes. Popular around the world, braising is the method used for the classic North American pot roast, Swiss steak, chicken cacciatore, and German rouladen, to name a few. Coq au vin. Braising comes from the French word braisier, the technique of cooking with wet heat. Large pieces of food are seared at high heat before the temperature is lowered and the food is simmered with just a little liquid, sometimes for hours. The low, slow process breaks down the connective tissue in meat and the tough fiber in vegetables, resulting in a tender, mouth-watering dish and savory gravy. I talked to you a little bit about Sylvia, a Mike's Daily Podcast listener who's been listening for quite a long time. And she's a vegetarian, and she says you got to try the sweet potato recipe that you can find on YouTube. Sweet potato crock pot recipe. For the best results, it's important to choose the right items to braise. When it comes to meat, tough or fatty cuts work best. Look for chuck, rump, blade and bottom round beef, pork and beef ribs, chicken legs and thighs, lamb rib roast, pork shoulder butt, and brisket. Whole fish, like salmon and larger firm-fleshed fish like cod and halibut, can also be braised. Use a little white wine or clam juice for the liquid. Braising time depends on the fish's thickness, but is always much shorter than the time needed for meat. Yeah, because fish is so flaky. I don't know if that will work. I don't actually see a fish braising recipe here, and I'm getting this from the Costco connection. Now, for veggies, if you don't feel like killing a cute animal, you might want to, and I do find cows are the cutest, beautifulest animals. And yes, they poop a lot, and they're stinky, and there's flies all around them, but they are cute, beautiful animals. I've not ceased to enjoy cows, and I really don't like eating them. I feel bad. But perhaps for the podcast picture, I will have one with a cow in it. How about that? To show my appreciation. While meat tends to get most of the attention, some vegetables benefit from braising too. Potatoes, carrots, beets, mushrooms, artichokes, celery, broccoli, onions, peeled butternut squash. They are great choices with meat or braised on their own. Avoid soft summer squashes, tender greens, herbs, though the latter can be added halfway through braising for flavor, because that thing is just they just evaporate when you slow cook those, because the meat is not as thick on those. Successful braising demands the right pot. It should be oven friendly and sturdy enough to withstand high heat, large enough to hold a small chicken or roast, have a tight fitted lid, and hold heat well. A cast iron Dutch oven is ideal, but a good quality stainless steel soup pot with a secure lid works well too. And hey, what about the crock pot? You just have to do the initial browning in another, in a pan or something, and then transport it to the crock pot. When choosing your braising liquid, think flavor: broth, vegetable juice, wine, beer. That enhances the final product. And finally, because braising recipes don't know the size of your particular pot, always consider the liquid called for as something of a guideline. You may need to adjust. Braising liquid should reach only halfway up your main ingredient. Anything more than that, and you're moving into the realm of poaching or stewing. Preheat your oven to what the recipe calls for, typically 275 to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Dry the meat with a paper towel, season with salt, pepper, or other spices. In a heavy pot, heat a few tablespoons of oil over medium-high heat. Brown the meat on all sides, being careful not to crowd the pot and taking time to brown each side well. Depending on what you're braising, you may need to do this in batches. Remove the meat to a plate. Add sliced onion, garlic, and any additional seasonings to the pot. For fast braising dishes like chicken or fish, add vegetables now and saute for 2 to 3 minutes. For roasts or larger cuts of meat, add vegetables halfway through the braising process. Deglaze the pan by adding a small portion of the braising liquid and scraping up any brown bits that are stuck to the bottom of the pan. Stir. Return the meat to the pot along with any juices that have collected on the plate and remaining liquid. Add remaining liquid to the halfway point of the main ingredient. Bring the liquid to a simmer on top of the stove, cover the pot, and slide into the oven. Continue to cook the meat until completely tender. Remove the meat from the oven and set aside to rest for a few minutes. The remaining liquid can be strained and served on the side or thickened for gravy. Yes. By the way, jumping out of food and into this little bit of news that came out today, Kurt Cobain, the FBI files surrounding him, reignite the questions surrounding his death. In order for the FBI to initiate an investigation of any complaint, specific facts must be present to indicate that a violation of federal law within their investigation jurisdiction has occurred. Cobain's legacy has always been under the microscope. We're only 5 years removed from the great documentary on the musician Kurt Cobain, Montage of Heck. You have to imagine what else the FBI might be sitting on from the past few years. If only more letters from fans who missed the Grunge Hall of Famer were released. And if you want to know the impact of Nirvana, Kurt Cobain left after his death, you can look everywhere. Kid Cudi paid tribute to the rocker on Saturday Night Live just a month ago. His old cardigans sell for 6 figures, and more than 15 years since his 1984 suicide, fans are still hoping to unearth new information about his death, which some believe involved foul play. The FBI released a 10-page file yesterday from its archives regarding Cobain's death. The file mostly includes letters from individuals who merely wrote to the FBI pleading that the Bureau take a second look at the circumstances of Cobain's death. And India. The terrible coronavirus epidemic going on there. It's affecting everybody. People here in the Bay Area who have relatives in India, they know well. They all know somebody who's gotten the disease in some way. India has received tons of medical supplies from several friendly countries as aid in its fight against the catapulting coronavirus crisis. Where are the vaccines going is the big question. India, as well as foreign media, have struggled to find out, but to no avail. Even union ministries in India are unable to offer much clarity on the issue. An officer said that all the foreign aid is being received by the Indian Red Cross. It is then sent to the Ministry of External Affairs, and thereafter the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Home Affairs step in for domestic distribution. No ministry offered any details about the distribution of COVID-19 relief consignments. Interesting. All right. Well, I guess we've, at this point, gone about 45 minutes, yikes, into this very long podcast, the 10th anniversary podcast, Mike's Daily Podcast. When there are positive outcomes of a good lesson, some are insight, patience, perseverance, hope, and quietude, but there are 4 of special note from a good lesson that you learn at work, for example, when you've just recovered from your entire computer system going down. Awareness, which is an initial insight and understanding that something has occurred and exists. Deep knowledge, knowledge is power, which is acute cognizance beyond superficial levels of awareness. Wisdom, which is the proper application of deep knowledge. And courage, to face whatever life, your career, and whatever bad leaders throw at you. Bad managers, bad employees, people that are just bad, that like to throw gasoline on the fire to make stress even worse. This all from E. Arthur Self, PhD, from his book, Good Success, Learning Good Lessons from Bad Leaders. Let's see who's outside a cafe anyway, somewhere in Podcaster Valley. I might go an hour with this dang podcast. No, I want to wrap it up. Look who's here. Hello, my fancies. It's Chely Shoehart, gift shop supervisor. Wow, this podcast is really long. Yeah, it's almost as long as my career has been in radio. Remember when you were on the Santa Fe Cafe years ago? Yes, Mike Matthews, that was a lot of fun. I would be on the radio and say a couple of words, and then you'd play a Garth Brooks song. That's right. Garth Brooks would sing. Look who else is here. Hello, Mike. This is Floyd the Floorman. And this is John Deere, the engineer. Mike, I think you would end the podcast right about now if you were wise. Yes, it's all about wisdom and courage and knowledge. So let's end the show. Next show, it's going to be the wonderful Benita, the Disgruntled Fiddle Player, the Brewmaster. You can tell me what you think about any of this. 336MM Daily. 3 plus 3 equals 6. MM is in Mike Matthews. Daily isn't what this podcast will try to continue to be, though it has not been for the past couple of weeks because of the obvious reasons I've told you about. But we'll persevere and keep going and learn from our mistakes. And you can check out my live show on the internet tomorrow, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Pacific time. Find that link now at MikesDailyPodcast.com. And with more about all of that, the lady who is soon to become a mom and will be celebrating Mother's Day a year from now, definitely. Take it away, Afraid.
Mike's Daily Podcast is written and produced and performed by Mike Matthews. His podcast is super easy to find. Download or listen to his show and read his blog at MikesDailyPodcast.com. Email Mike now at MikesDailyPodcast@gmail.com. See you tomorrow. Bye.